Perfect. So we are going to be talking about that here in just a second. I'm going to be a little bit interactive on tonight's workshop. So if you have your chat boxes open, that's great. But before we get started, I want to know, where are you guys joining from tonight? I'm hoping we get a lot more people here tonight. But where are we joining in the chat box? If you could just drop in like city, state area that you guys are joining us from. That way I kind of get an idea of where everybody is at this evening. Okay, we got some Nashville, Tennessee, Louisiana, a little bit down in the south. It's nice. Michigan, all the way up in the north. Very nice. Well, good. Thank you for joining us, guys. Um, as you can see tonight, the workshop is called the Stress Hijack. And what we're going to be talking about is how stress is hurting high achieving men and women. Over 50 is kind of the group that I work with most predominantly, but this holds true for people younger than that as well. And so what we're going to talk about is how stress is affecting your performance and what you can do about it. All right. And so today I'm going to explain how all of these connect from a physiologic perspective, and what are these hidden stress symptoms, these stress systems that are becoming imbalanced in our bodies, and how are those imbalances affecting the way that we perform. Because this is a workshop rather than just a straight Q&A, we're also going to be doing an assessment here about halfway through. And what we're going to be doing is using a proprietary app that I have here for functional medicine. And we go through a questionnaire that takes about 5 to 7 minutes. And that'll help us validate some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And it shows us where you're sitting right now. And then after we get those answers, get the results from the assessment, we'll talk about some solutions, and we're going to have a little fun with this along the way. So I hope that sounds good to everybody. But before we get into it, I want you to think about whether you've ever noticed any of these patterns before. Okay, the first one might sound a little male oriented, but really it can go either way, because we've got both men and women in here. So the number one is, have you ever noticed that your spouse has stopped initiating sex? Or maybe they do initiate sex, but when they do, you can't perform the way that you used to. Okay. Number two would be, you're training and exercising and you're still working out, but instead of getting stronger, you actually feel like you're getting weaker, right? You're putting in the effort, but your recovery takes longer. Your strength is slowly declining, and it's noticeable because this didn't tend to happen to you before, right? And are you finding that you simply can't maintain the same power or the same performance that you previously had? Number three is, are you noticing any more brain fog? Okay, maybe you don't have the same mental clarity and sharpness that you used to, or you're in a boardroom, somebody walks in, and while you're there in the boardroom, you can't like pick up the names fast enough. You recognize the face, but the name doesn't come to you. You don't know why you're there, or maybe you walk into a room and you forget why you're there. You just have that cloudiness in your head. Okay. And then number four is, are you getting a little snappy? Right? Maybe you're more irritable around your spouse, your family, your colleagues, or you find yourself snapping at people who really don't deserve it. Now, I want you to put a number in the chat. Which one of these hits home the most? 1, 2, 3, or 4? So put that number for me in the chat so we can know what you guys are struggling with right now. And we'll give you a second to answer. And remember, this is a workshop, so I want you to be participating. Think about what's actually happening in your own body rather than just sitting and listen, because you'll have a much better perspective and be able to connect the dots better if you can connect what's going on. So I see those. We've got several twos and several fours all at the same time. So very good. Thank you for that. All righty. So here's the bottom line. This really isn't a personality problem, right? This isn't something that you should automatically dismiss as aging, and it isn't something that's just in your head. Okay. You don't necessarily need some fancy meditation technique, and you don't simply need to just manage your stress better. And you don't necessarily need to go on a vacation to manage this stress because what this really comes down to is something that I like to call a biological hijacking. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that there's not psychological stress or that it doesn't exist because we all know that it does. And we all have external stressors, right? But there's also a tremendous amount of internal stress happening inside our bodies. And that internal stress affects your chemistry. And I've talked about this internal versus external stress quite a few times on our Q&As, but we're going to drill down a little bit more on that as we continue. And so your body's chemistry starts getting muddled. It doesn't work the same way it did when you were in your 20s. That biological hijacking that I'm referring to, it comes from many different things. It comes from the food that we eat. It comes from chemicals that we've been exposed to and that have accumulated over the decades. And slowly, our body chemistry starts to change, and ultimately, that begins affecting our hormones. And your hormones are a big part of what keeps you strong, keeps you healthy, energetic, vibrant. And that's why, as a teenager, you can bounce back so quickly. But as we get older, we've accumulated more of these chemical imbalances, and our bodies don't work exactly the way that they used to. Now, that's the biological hijacking that I'm talking about. But I want you to understand that there is good news about that because these imbalances, they're measurable. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. And it's something that we can actually work on as we progress through different protocols and treatments. Now, for many of you, you've probably gone to your doctor and said something like, I just don't feel right, or I don't feel the way I used to, something feels off. Can you check my blood? And they usually will go ahead and check your blood. And most of the time, they're going to hear that everything looks good, right? They tell you that maybe you should get a hobby, do some stuff that's going to help reduce stress, like go for a walk, go take a vacation. But the problem is that they may be looking at the wrong numbers, right? Conventional medicine often doesn't have the model that allows us to think outside of those conventional ranges. And what I want to do tonight is widen the scope of how you think about your own health, because you shouldn't simply accept that your performance has to continue going downhill. We want you to figure out why it's happening and what we can do to start moving your performance in the other direction. So let's try and bring this down to a little bit of a simple level. On the left-hand side of the slide, we've got stress. Now, everybody has stress, and that stress can accumulate over time. And it can be psychological stress, and it can be physical stress from training. And most importantly, for what we're talking about tonight, it can also be something called a biological stress. And as that stress accumulates and begins hitting your body harder than usual, we produce a hormone called cortisol. Now, think about a very stressful event that's you've gone through, that you've experienced. And I want you to actually feel your body change. Okay. Part of what you're feeling, remember, it's like that pins and needles going down your back. It's the butterflies in your stomach. Okay. That stress response is a release of cortisol. Now, cortisol in and of itself is not bad. We need cortisol. The problem is when we have too much of it for too long. And so here's where this becomes important, is the starting point for cortisol, and many of our steroid hormones are regulated by cortisol, but it's also regulated by something called pregnenolone. Now, pregnenolone is a pro-hormone, meaning it comes before your hormones are produced. It's something that's released in the adrenal glands, and your adrenals sit on top of your kidneys. And pregnenolone, it can move down a pathway that ultimately supports cortisol production, or it can support the production of your hormones, such as testosterone. Now, for both men and women, testosterone is incredibly important. Now, when we have excessive stress, continually pushing through our system towards cortisol, it allows us to overproduce that cortisol, and we can begin taking resources away from our hormones that we actually want to support. And this is commonly described in medicine as the pregnenolone steal. If you look at this little guy on the left side of the slide, he's the one who's actually stealing the pregnenolone. You have that little thief over there. And that really is the concept I want you to understand. So picture this, you're walking through a forest and all of a sudden a bear jumps out at you. Okay. Uh, what do you want? Do you want the cortisol so that you can run and escape, or do you want testosterone so you can have your sex organs functioning well, you can make babies and all that kind of stuff? Personally, I think you're going to want the cortisol, right? But when that happens for too long and we make too much cortisol, meaning your body goes through too much stress, your body starts to prioritize that stress response into cortisol. And ultimately, your performance can suffer. Now, what does that actually look like in real life? Okay, in real life, your libido isn't where it used to be, right? Maybe your partner's libido is in the tank. Maybe your libido is in the tank and your body can be under too much stress. Or you can be going to the gym, cycling, running, training, but you don't feel as strong as you did before, right? You start gaining weight, particularly around your midsection, because cortisol loves that central weight gain around your belly. And then there's also that mental side of things, right? You don't have the same sharpness that you used to. You've got that brain fog. Maybe you can work till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but after 2 o'clock, you're pretty much useless. You don't want to make another complicated decision because your brain is just like, I've gone through this, there's too much going on. Now, that's the connection I want you to start seeing. Okay, stress is affecting cortisol, and that hormonal imbalance is affecting your performance overall. So if that makes sense to you, go ahead and put a 1 in the chat. I want to make sure that you guys are understanding that process because that is one of the key things in helping you to understand what stress is really doing to your body. Okay, so when we've got too much stress, our body prioritizes cortisol production rather than supporting the hormones we associate with strength, recovery, libido, energy, performance, and even more. Okay, and so that's the basic concept I want you to understand. Right, so I see those ones there in the chat. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Steve Davis. I'm a PhD doctor of natural medicine. I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner, and I am the founder of Bluegrass Natural Health here in Lexington, Kentucky, where I have my clinic set up and we see clients here in person and virtually. But before getting into functional medicine, I spent more than 25 years in the nursing world. I worked in the emergency room, cardiac cath, electrophysiology, spent over 20 years in surgery as an advanced practice nurse assisting docs with surgeries. And so my background really bridges both conventional and functional medicine together. And so today my focus is working with high achieving men and women over 50 who don't want to accept that losing their energy, their mental sharpness, their strength, their performance is simply part of getting older, right? I use functional testing, advanced lab analysis, and a system-based approach to figure out what's actually changing inside their body and then figuring out what we can do about it. And ultimately, my goal is pretty simple, is I want people to stay sharp, active, and strong and independent as long as possible. I mean, that's what I mean when I talk about longevity without limits. Now, you might be thinking, I'm stressed now, but I've been under stress before. So why does this affect me differently now than it did back when I was 30 years old? And that's a great question and one that is worthy of asking. So let's try and make it as simple as possible, right? When you were younger, your hormones and your body chemistry may have been operating closer to 100% of their potential, right? But by the time you reach 50 years old, that production capacity is significantly reduced, sometimes even up to 50%. Now, put additional stress on top of that, and stress takes whatever remaining capacity that you have and pushes it down even further. And so that's why you don't bounce back the way that you used to. You don't have the same resilience. And yes, age does play a role. But what we're really talking about is this biological hijacking and the accumulation of chemical imbalances in the body over time. That's really the simplest way to put it. Okay, so let's focus on really talk about what these three different types of stress are that we mentioned earlier. and see how those really play into this process of stress accumulation in our body. And so first we have a psychological stress, right? That comes from life events. It comes from work pressures, relationship problems, financial worries. These are things that happen to anybody and everybody throughout our lives. And then we have physical stress. That's from working out. That's training for a marathon. That is something that you are doing to your body physically and putting your body under a significant amount of physical burden that can create stress. But then we have what I consider to be the biggest stressor because it can be present 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's that metabolic stress. Alrighty, I like to call this one the internal stress, and it is incredibly important because we're probably always going to have some kind of psychological stress. We're probably always going to have some kind of physical stress, but we can work on minimizing our metabolic stress. And this is that chemical stress that happens to the inside of our body. So maybe it's your blood sugars all over the place for somebody who's diabetic. Maybe it's your detoxification pathways that just aren't working properly. Maybe it's that your gut is a mess. Okay. The fundamental systems of the body aren't working the way that they should. And that creates stress all by itself. And unlike some of the other stressors, this metabolic stress can be 24/7. So when you're sleeping, you're not consciously thinking about your job. When you're not training or working out, you're not doing that while you're asleep as well. But you can still have metabolic stresses even while you're asleep. Maybe you've got parasites, right? And maybe you've accumulated heavy metals in your body and you have to work through those. You see, those things can continually create stress on your body, and some of them may have been accumulated over several years. So let's make this a little interactive again. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of the issues that we've talked about are actually affecting your life? Okay, 1 means they're pretty minor. 10 means that this is really affecting my life. Go ahead and place that into the chat for me. But think about it. Are these stresses, are they affecting your business? Are they affecting your relationships? Maybe they're affecting your athletic performance. Thank you. I see the 9 there, Mirage. Maybe it's affecting your personality. Maybe it's affecting you personally in some other way. Great, Karen, I see that. Henny, I see that. That's great. We have an 8, another 8 there. I want you to actually think about where you are right now as you do this, because some of you may be in a pretty good place and this isn't affecting you much. But for others of you, it's having a significant impact. So, right now we're just going to try and validate that. Okay. And one of the biggest things we can do, like I said before, is we're going to be doing an assessment. And this is really going to actually create an assessment through our proprietary app. Complete the assessment, because testing is really what gets us the most knowledge. We don't want to be guessing at things. It's always good to stop guessing and actually test where we're at, so that way we can identify what we need to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place a link in the chat here. I want you to go ahead and click on that link, and we're going to actually use the app that we've created to complete a stress assessment to see where you're at. So when you click on the link, it's going to take you to a website for a Thrive 9 assessment. And what it's going to look like is this right here. If you look at it, if you haven't been with me before, you're going to be clicking on down at the bottom where it says sign up, where this arrow is pointing down here. If you haven't done it before, that's where you want to go. If you have done these assessments with me before, I want you to go ahead and sign in like you normally would. And we're going to be clicking on the stress assessment. So go ahead, click on the link, and then fill out the information. And once you're inside, you'll see several different assessments. Those assessments are going to look like this. And what we're going to be looking for is the stress assessment. You could see it down here. On my screen, it's on the bottom left, but for you guys, it might be somewhere else. It might be in the middle or on the right side. But you can see there's several other assessments there, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But I want you guys to take a few minutes. Typically, it should take about 5 to 7 minutes. to complete that. And then once you complete that assessment, you're going to get your scores, and they're going to look like this. Okay. You're going to notice that there's an A, B, C, D, and E score. And there's also below that going to be this A, B, C, and then there's going to be a C, D, E score. So I want you to go ahead and take the assessment, answer the questions. Okay. And once you see the scores, go ahead and place those into the chat so I know that you guys are finishing up. And then we're going to walk through what those numbers mean. So go ahead and take your time, do that. And this is really worth doing because you really want to dial in where your performance is at, right? Stress is where we. All righty, Sanjay, I see that in there. 14, 14, 7, 13, and 48. It's great. All righty, Tana, we'll make sure that if you have any questions, you can always send us an email and we can look at things a little bit later. Let's wait to get one or two more scores in there, and then we can start talking about that a little bit more here. So for the scores, the 124 as a total, really we want to see is the individual scores. So the A, B, C, D, and E, those posted individually. And then combining, if you scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see this second portion here where it says your combined ABC score along with your CDE score. Want to get those there. So Sanjay, it looks like you may have A, B, C, D, but no E on your scores there. Is it possible we're missing one? And then combined ABC and a combined CDE. So we've got a 72 and a 73. Okay. Appreciate those numbers there. I'm assuming that's going to be the ABC and the CDE numbers. So let's go ahead and we're going to start talking about these different numbers and what they mean here a little bit. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, what you'll notice is that there are descriptions ranging from stress and wired, stressed and worried, there's empty tank, there's mentally exhausted, and then you have tired down there as well, the stressed and tired. And the ABC and the CDE sections help us to understand whether your body appears to be dealing with too much cortisol or too little cortisol and moving more towards the exhaustion type of cortisol state. Now, when cortisol activity becomes too low, we're essentially looking at this chronically exhausted pattern, right? This adrenal fatigue where your adrenals just aren't putting out any cortisol at all. And the ABC score really helps us to identify a pattern associated more with an excessive stress hormone, so too much cortisol, or what we would call hypercortisol. Okay. The CDE helps us to identify that more flattened, exhausted pattern, which is the hypocortisol. Now, the thing to realize is neither extreme is where you want to be, right? Our typical threshold here should be at about 35 max. If you're below 35, your body is generally controlling things pretty well. And once these numbers start to climb, and particularly when they're above 35, is when we start seeing red flags that your body is more stressed than it can comfortably manage. And that helps explains why you may be experiencing these signs and symptoms. So uh, now for iPhone 37, I see your scores at 72, 73. They're actually pretty equal right there, right? And so typically when we look at that, the higher number, the 73, would want us to think more of the hypocortisol, especially because they're so high. And so really at that point, we need to go back to your ABCD scores and see where you're actually sitting there and which one of those, or if all of them, are really the higher numbers. So, are you able to type in what your A, B, C, D, and E scores are? And quite often, when somebody is, uh, when our scores look as equal as they are, one of the questions I often end up asking is, how much are you sleeping? Right? Because if you're sleeping fewer than 7 hours, typically I would say you're more in that hyper cortisol state. And then if you're sleeping 8, 9 hours and you still waking up exhausted, most of the time you're in that hypocortisol state. So yeah, here we see some numbers. So you're leaning more towards the 28 and the 31. And so the 28 being the stressed and wired. So I'm guessing you feel really stressed and wired, and then before the end of the day, you're just flat out exhausted. And I'm guessing that you're sleeping, the 8, 9 hours plus, but you're not feeling rested at the same time. Does that sound about right? Mentally exhausted and absolutely. So really, you are more in this, what I would say, in this hypocortisol state, and your body just can't shut down. So you may need different strategies also depending on what your biggest struggles are. And so we'll talk about that a little bit here because including different botanicals and different supplements that can help our bodies either slow down or help our body speed up and help us to metabolize that excess cortisol a little bit more efficiently. So if you're sleeping 8 to 9 hours and you're still waking up exhausted, really you're looking at that slow pattern where if you're sleeping 6 hours a day and you're still exhausted and tired, you may not be getting enough sleep, but you know, there's this inability to metabolize and process all those extra cortisols. It's typically in hypercortisol state, and your body's having a hard time regulating and down regulating all that extra cortisol. Okay. So, um, that's one of the reasons why we simply can't just say, you're stressed, go meditate. Okay. We need to actually understand the type of stress pattern you're experiencing and then determine what we need to do to move your body back towards normal. Okay. When we can bring our body back towards a healthier state and back towards those green sections in the tests, then our performance tends to improve across all areas. Now, if you scroll down a little bit further on your results under your stress assessment, you'll see that there are specific supplements that are being suggested for you. And those can give you a basic starting point to get your system back in balance. And the algorithm that is programmed into this app, it was developed specifically for your assessment numbers. So based off of your assessment specifically, will tell you which supplements you need. Now, for those of you who have several high numbers, those recommendations can probably feel a little bit overwhelming. And there may be quite a few things listed there. And so I'm happy to give you some options as for what to do next if we're looking at your results and thinking, okay, what do I actually do with all this, right? The important point is that these recommendations, they aren't generic, even though they can look overwhelming. Now, depending on how high your numbers are, might determine how many recommendations you have. So somebody who didn't score very high, you can end up with, the Foundation Wellness Pack. You can end up with active aminos and maybe one or two other supplements. For somebody who has, the numbers like 72 and 73, there's probably a list of 10 different supplements. And no, you're not supposed to start all 10. They are a starting point to look at specifically which ones. And if you want recommendations on which supplements to start with on that, we can look at that again at the end of this. Or if you want to, you can shoot me an email and we can look at that as well. Okay. But if either your A, B, or C or your CDE score is above 35, I want you to recognize that that is a red flag, that your stress hormones are out of balance. And I want you to really connect those results with what you're experiencing. Are you energetic, or do you feel like you can never completely recover from anything, right? Is your energy low? Your assessment is helping to actually validate where that imbalance may be, right? Are you experiencing brain fog? You can't make a decision. Maybe you reach that 2 o'clock or that 5 o'clock in the afternoon and think, I can't think anymore. I just want to lie on the couch. Don't ask me to make any complicated decisions, right? And then again, connect those dots. Or what about your sleep? Maybe you're the person who wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you can't fall asleep because you are sitting there trying to solve the world's problems, right? You just are constantly ruminating about the next day's issues, right? Or maybe you go to bed and it takes you an hour to fall asleep. Or maybe you wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning when you really want to be sleeping till 6. Okay. Those sleep quality issues can connect directly back to your stress hormone patterns that we just identified. Okay. And so then what about your sex drive or your libido? Okay. Maybe it's completely disappeared. Maybe your partner isn't initiating sex because now you're grumpy all the time. Or maybe they initiate sex, but you can't perform. Okay. Whatever that looks like, whatever your stress scores look like, and how those symptoms are displaying themselves, it's really helping you to understand that there is an imbalance and that you need to connect the dots to what is going on overall inside your body. Okay. So here's what I want you to take away from this workshop is that this isn't a psychological stress. Okay. This isn't simply I'm stressed at work, and it isn't I'm just training too hard. There can be an entire biological hijacking happening inside your body that's contributing to all these stress responses. Maybe you recently have taken antibiotics and that's disrupted your gut. Maybe your body chemistry has changed significantly. And for some people, there may be parasites that they don't know are even there. For others, heavy metal exposures, right? Those are just examples of types of internal stressors that we commonly look at. And the point is that these stresses can be present 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even while you're sleeping. And those internal stressors can disrupt your hormones. And those hormones are a major part of what gives you your energy, your resilience, strength, libido, mental clarity, and so on. But now I want you to think back to cortisol. We talked about this a few minutes ago. When the stress response continually pulls resources towards cortisol, remember that pregnenolone still towards cortisol, it can affect your testosterone. And a balanced testosterone matters for both men and women. And when testosterone is low, you may notice more body fat, you have less drive, you're less motivated, you'd rather sit on a couch than take on something challenging, right? You could also notice that your thyroid starts to become affected because that excess cortisol is going to affect thyroid function. And when thyroid function suffers, you may lose energy, your brain doesn't work as well, and you might start gaining weight too. Now, growth hormones can also be affected, and so now you start putting on fat instead of muscle. And then your recovery becomes more difficult, and you may even notice changes in your skin. You see, these things begin showing up externally at the same time that you are feeling them internally as well. And so that's why we really need a framework when we're going through all this stuff. When we have a framework, everything really starts to make sense because you can connect those dots better. And so when we have internal and external stress affecting our body, That stress affects our hormones, and then we've got to restore those systems. But there's another part of this picture, okay? And that is what is sitting there at the end, and that's your genetics, right? Some people can handle an enormous amount of stress, while other people can experience the exact same stress and their bodies crumble. Okay. Now, these systems, they all work together. Remember, in conventional medicine, you have a doctor for every system, and they don't understand how the systems talk to each other. But what we really need to know is that your body is not a separate system. There are different parts, but they all communicate together. And so when one fails dramatically, it can drag all the others down with it. And so you may know somebody your age, similar body types, similar responsibilities, similar stress, but they seem to handle everything better than you do. And part of that difference comes down to genetics, right? Some people have genetic variations that affect how effectively they can process their hormones, their detoxification, their oxidative stress, and even their ability to recover. And so that's why comparing yourself with someone else doesn't always work. You can do exactly what they're doing and not get the same results. Now, if you want to get a little nerdy with me, these are a couple of those genes that we have that affect these different processes greatly. You have the COMT or the COMP gene, which affects your catecholamines, your stress hormone processing. There's also MTHFR, which is one of the first genes that was identified. It affects how you metabolize your different vitamins. You have SOD, which works on mitochondrial health. And I'm not going to go deep into those tonight because we don't want to turn this into a genetics lecture. But the important point is that genetics can influence how your body responds to stress. And when we work with someone at a deeper level, that's one of those areas that we definitely investigate because we want to optimize your body to do its best with what you have. Okay. So, where do we go from here? At this point, you have a couple of different choices, right? It's like, why? Um, how do you really figure this out by yourself? That's one option, okay? Is now you've got supplement recommendations at the bottom of your assessment, and you can start there and work on things by yourself. Come back in a month, copy and paste that link somewhere so you can come back and take the assessments again, repeat the assessment and see where you are at that point. Or we also have one-on-one options where we can help you restore these systems at a much deeper level, right? If your ABC or your CDE score is above 35, I want you to take that pretty seriously because your health is your biggest asset, right? For some of us, our finances might be incredibly important, but if you don't have health, what good are your finances, right? Maybe it's that your relationships are one of your biggest priorities, but um, you want to make sure that you're at your best in your marriage and your personal relationships with your friends. And again, health becomes one of the most important assets in your ability to connect with others. And so, whatever your goals are, health always is underneath them. And just like you might have a good financial advisor to help you manage your money, there's also value in having a good health advisor to help you manage your health. Okay. And so we've created different ways for people to access this framework. And at a simple level, you can use the app that we've just gone through and go through all those different assessments as a self-directed path. And as you saw, we don't have just one assessment, right? There were multiple assessments there that allow you to look at the different systems in your body and the different things that we are working through your neurologic system, your sleep, your hormones. Okay. But that's more of a self directed level. At a deeper level, we can use things such as genetic testing. We can do blood work, stool analysis, urine analysis, and there's several other functional tests that allow us to go deeper to really get to the answers that we need. And so the goal is to make sure that people here can really receive support at whatever level makes sense for them. And sometimes that decision is a financial one, sometimes it's a practical one. Okay. Maybe you have more time and you want to work through things yourself, or maybe you just don't have the time and you want somebody to guide you through it. Alrighty. So walking you through what these look like, the self-directed program is a program that starts at $99 a month. You receive community support. Plus, there's a group Zoom meeting with me every month to help evaluate and help you with your process. And we use the same general framework we use in our higher level clients. The primary difference is that it's self-directed and it doesn't include individualized functional testing. You have all the assessments to help you go through those, and we meet and we can talk about those in a group setting. So if you're looking for a place to start, that's one possibility. And really, I have a hard time believing that someone would come here looking for help, knowing that they have stress in their life and not wanting to move forward with a solution. So this is one of the easiest places to start. For those of you who don't want to do this completely on your own, we have a mid-tier and a high-tier program. And this is where we start working with you one-on-one. We do some testing, including the comprehensive blood work and one other functional test, depending on what you specifically are working through. And then we meet every other month. We dial in your personalized nutrition plan, and we use the same overall framework, but now it's customized specifically to you. So instead of looking at an assessment and trying to figure it out and figuring out what to do yourself, we're here to help you interpret, and we're here to help you build a plan around your individual situation. Now, this is for somebody who wants more guidance, more personalization, and some testing, but doesn't necessarily need the deepest level of testing or the concierge support. Then we have our highest level of support. This is kind of like the platinum program, and this is where we go much deeper. We can do much more comprehensive testing that is going to include your genetic testing, your blood work, stool analysis, urine analysis, and other functional tests depending on what you specifically need to investigate. This is also much more concierge-esque. And so we're working with you one-on-one on a regular basis, looking at your results, adjusting your plan, and making sure you're fully supported throughout the whole process. So this is really for someone who says, I don't want to try and figure this out by myself. I want to understand what's actually going on. I want deeper testing. I want somebody to help me dial this in. And that's really the major difference between the three levels. The $99 program is more self-directed. The mid-tier gives you personalized one-on-one support with lighter testing. And then the high tier is our most comprehensive option with deeper testing, more customization, and concierge level support. And so, but before we go, I really have three questions I want you guys to ask yourself, right? This first one is, what is staying stuck costing you? Okay, think about that. What is it costing you financially or in your business? What is it costing you in your relationships? If you're irritable with your spouse or you're struggling in the bedroom, what is that costing your relationship? What is it costing you athletically, right? I work with several people in their 50s and 60s who still want to compete. They want to win races, they want to perform, and that's part of their identity. So you've got to decide what you're trying to achieve and what staying where you're currently at is costing you. Okay. And then the second question is, what are you already, or sorry, what have you already spent or what have you already wasted? Okay. How much have you spent on random supplements that you've gotten off of Instagram or TikTok? Have you invested in random programs that really have gotten you nowhere, or a concierge doctor who didn't really understand what was happening? And think about what you've already spent trying different things compared to following a proven process designed to get you to your goal as efficiently as possible. Now, we can completely turn things around in a week. No, we can't. Can we do it in a month? Probably not. There are no quick fixes when it comes to your health, but you can look forward and work towards your health goals more efficiently by using a proven process with a highly skilled team. Okay. And then the third question I want you to ask yourself is probably the most important, is what's the cost of waiting another year? Right? I've talked to people, I've been doing this for several years now, and I've talked to people after a couple of years, they say, I'll start next year. Like I'll start in 2027, right? And then 2027 gets here and they say, oh, I'll start in 2028. I've done that multiple times with people. Meanwhile, your hormones, they just continue to decline. Your biological chemistry continues to change. And if you leave these problems alone, they continue to get worse. Okay. That can leave you even more vulnerable to chronic disease, to other serious health problems, to things like cancers. And so what and so I want you to really look at that and ask yourself, what is waiting another year going to cost me? Or do you want to be proactive and recognize these red flags ahead of time? Because when we talk about hormonal optimization, I'm really talking about identifying and addressing what's driving the imbalance, not simply going somewhere and then getting an injection. Okay. That's when you start talking about long-term health seriously. Now, I use some big terminology here, and so I want to make sure I simplify it. Hypercortisol just really means that you have too much cortisol going through your body. Hypo means that you're dealing with too little, right? Neither extreme is good, and it's not where you want to be. And if you completed your assessments, you've got a better idea of whether you're in the green or not. And if you're in the green, you've got things moving in the right direction. That's great. But if you're in the yellow, the orange, the red, we've got some work to do, right? And our goal is to move those numbers back towards the green. If that's where you're at, there will be several things that we need to look at. And you can begin with a self-directed approach, or we can investigate something at a much deeper level. At the end of the day, there are a few paths that you can take, right? You can do nothing. And I'm grateful that you joined us if that's you. And I hope that I planted a seed tonight that might help you lean into your own health. But if these problems are already occurring and you do nothing about them, there's a good chance they're simply not going to disappear, right? Or you can begin with a simple $99 a month self-directed program. You'll receive an onboarding call, uh, private a private call from me. You can participate in our monthly group calls. You get videos that walk you through all the processes that we go through through our programs that I take all three tiers through. You have access again to that private community, which is also a place for you to ask questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop that link. If that's something that you might want to do, I'm going to drop that link into the chat right now. And that takes you directly to that payment page. Okay. And there's still a lot of support within that. You're simply going to be more self-guided rather than having complete customized program. Okay. Now, for those of you who want to explore one or more comprehensive programs that we have, for those of you, the best thing to do is really to book a call with me. It's a free 30-minute strategy call where I'm going to copy this and put this into the chat. But with this strategy call, it's a free 30-minute talk. You and I get to sit down, talk about where you're at, what you're experiencing, what your health has been like, what have you done, what have you tried, and where are your struggles really at to see which program makes the most sense for you. There's no pressure. I'm here to support you either way. Alrighty. And so as I start to wrap things up here, there will be a replay available, but I want you to know that we completed the assessments because that's going to be the important part, right? If you're wondering whether you need to buy every supplement recommendation that came across on the assessments, the answer is that I would rather just look at your individual situations first, and then we can determine which one makes the most sense to prioritize. And so if you're really unsure of where to start, send me an email. The email address is info@bgnaturalhealth, bluegrassnaturalhealth.com. Send me your scores and I can help guide you where you need to be going. Tell me that you completed the assessment and I'll help you guide you what to do next. Okay. And so we can take a look and help you point towards a reasonable starting point. But at this point, if you guys have questions, feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions. We can go over your scores if you finish those and you can get those posted into the chat. But it's been great talking with you guys and let me know if I can help you in any other way.